So when I first started investing in startups, people literally asked me if I was lost. They'd be like, are you in the right room, little girl? We have two missions. One is to educate people on how to do this. And the second is to close the diversity gap.
It seems like there's a formula for everything.
There are a lot of formulas and a lot of numbers.
Marker.
Every founder has that moment when they realize that building a great product isn't enough. To grow, you need a strategy that lasts. That's where Angela Lee comes in. She's a professor at Columbia Business School and the founder of 37 Angels, a community of investors that's evaluated over 20,000 startups. Angela spent her career helping founders bridge the gap between big ideas and sustainable growth. And in this conversation, she's sharing how you can do the same. You'll learn how to think like an investor, craft a pitch that stands out, and build the kind of systems that set you up for long-term success. Angela, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you've built a career out of bridging the worlds of startup and investing. What first drew you to entrepreneurship and venture capital?
Well, I went to UC Berkeley and I graduated during the first dot-com boom. And so money was falling from the sky and it felt like the thing that you did was you started a startup. And that was where my love of entrepreneurship first got built. And the idea of like literally having an idea one day and the next day being able to be like, I'm going to go do something about it and take this idea and bring it into actuality was really, really exciting to me. And that passion for creation has never really left me. So I started as a founder in 1999 when I was 19 years old.
Yourself?
Yeah, I was a founder
Okay.
years and years ago. And then in 2008, one of my best girlfriends approached me and said, will you invest in the kind of distribution rights of this movie that I'm making?
A movie? Hollywood was calling. Okay,
Exactly.
cool.
And it was a movie about increasing the awareness of mental health in the Asian community. And so I wrote a $5,000 check, and all of a sudden, I was an investor.
How did the movie go? What sparked the next step after those $5,000?
Yeah, so the movie was critically acclaimed, but financially didn't do so well. So I did lose that first check. But all of a sudden, I was an investor, and people were sending me deals. And every year, I was looking at 10 to 25 companies and maybe investing in one. And then all of a sudden, I realized I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm going to all these meetings and I'm furiously, Googling every term that I read. And I said, someone should really teach people how to do this. And at that point, I had learned a lot. And I said, I'm going to teach like 10 of my close girlfriends how to do this. And we were going to start an investment book club type of thing where once a month we're going to get together, we're going to drink wine, everyone's going to bring one deal. And I was going to teach them the stuff that I was learning about investing, and we were going to collectively invest in one company. That was how 37 Angels got started.
You've built 37 Angels around activating new types of founders that don't necessarily always get the opportunities. What has that been like? Why have you decided to do that? And also, how have you seen this impact the startup landscape?
Yeah. So when I first started investing in startups, I didn't look like anyone else in the room. I was in my late 20s. I'm an Asian woman. And people literally asked me if I was lost. They'd be like, are you in the right room, little girl? And then once they realized I had intended to walk into the room, they would ask me things like, well, where'd you get your money from? What does your husband do? Who makes your financial decisions? All these questions. And I was like, okay, there's a lot of focus on the diverse founder. And we all know the statistics that only 2% of venture capital funding goes to all female teams. 18% goes to mixed teams, which means that over 80% goes to all male teams.
I did not know that stat.
And I can unfortunately give you 10 more depressing statistics around how not diverse the people who receive the money is. And there are a lot of people working on that. But I said, well, one of the ways to work on it is to make sure that the people writing checks are more diverse. And that's what 37 Angels is really focused on. We started specifically by educating women investors on how to do this. And we've since expanded our mandate to just diverse investors of all types. And so we have two missions. One is to educate people on how to do this. And the second is to close the diversity gap.
Let's think about this from a founder perspective. Where do you start?
A question I get asked sometimes is, well, how do I find these investors, right? The first thing is there are websites that list investors. One is openvc.app. And it literally lists investors by sector, by stage, and by location. And there are Angel Capital Association lists angel networks where you can find angels. So that's one way. But I think the best way is, again, through your own network. So look up people that you want to be connected to. And I promise you, you have second-degree connections on LinkedIn through them. And then write the person you have in common a nice email saying, hey, can you please introduce me to so-and-so? Here's my pitch deck. Here's 3 bullet points why I'm awesome. Ask them to take a meeting with me. And if you do that 20 times, I promise you one of them will turn into a meeting.
It's a numbers game.
It is a numbers game.
How can a founder think like an investor and set themselves up in a way that they're speaking in the investor language?
So the first question I would ask the founder is, how much money do you need? And I think a lot of the times founders are like, well, investors, you tell me how much money you're willing to give me. And I think that's not the right place to start, because only the founder knows how much it costs to make their product, how many people they need to hire on their team, how much they're going to spend on Instagram ads, whatever it is, right? And we really recommend to founders really ask for what you need. And if anything, maybe even give it a 20% buffer on top of that. And then the next thing is to know what metrics an investor is going to care about. And so one thing that investors are going to care about more than absolute revenue and sales is actually growth and momentum. I think a mistake that founders make is they'll say, well, we have $100,000 in revenue. Well, that's great, but over what time period and how has that grown? Just to give you a sense, for VC investors, you'll hear triple, triple, double, double. And what that means is that for the first 4 years of your business, we want you tripling revenue year over year the first 2 years, and then doubling year over year after that. And if you don't have those growth numbers, explain to them how you're going to get them in the future. And the final thing I will say is that you want anything that you've done, how are you going to repeat it? Any proof point that you have, any data point that you have, it has to be sustainable, because again, we're looking for long-term, sustainably growing companies.
I'm going to ask a very specific question here. You said triple, triple, double. That goes against my, wouldn't you want to keep going up? Triple, triple, double sounds like...
Why is the pace of growth slowing?
Yeah.
Because realistically, when you're very small, it's really easy to go from 10 customers to 30 customers. But if you have 1,000 customers, it's much harder to go from 1,000 to 3,000. So the pace of growth slows because once you get bigger, it's harder to grow.
That makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like you hit a little bit of a ceiling, right? So it's more about sustaining it.
Exactly.
How do you paint that perspective of, yes, we do have a plan moving forward?
The first thing I would say is don't approach an investor when you've done one successful TikTok campaign, right? Maybe you've done a series of 5 Instagram ads or 5 TikTok videos, whatever the case may be, but showing, again, some continued success. I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing is the ratio we like to see is what's called your customer lifetime value to your customer acquisition cost. So customer lifetime value is how much does a customer spend with you? So let's say someone buys really great socks off of you. How often do they buy socks?
It depends on how smelly your feet are. Of course.
Of course. And it's different for if it's a running sock or if it's like a leisure sock, right? And this data exists. And the great thing about, the world that we live in is it's a very data-rich world. So there's almost no excuse for not doing that research. So your customer lifetime value tells you that this customer is going to spend $100 with you on socks over the next 2 years, right? That's the research that you do. Well, your customer acquisition cost has to be at most a third of that. And that is a ratio we look for, that your customer lifetime value is 3 times your customer acquisition cost. Well, your customer acquisition cost is, well, how much did it cost you to make that TikTok ad versus how many customers that you got? And so that's the math we look for you to do to make sure that this is a sustainable business model. That customers spend 3 times as much with you as you spend to acquire them.
It seems like there's a formula for everything.
There are a lot of formulas and a lot of numbers.
When you are evaluating startups, who are the startups that you have seen stand out in the way that sets them up to thrive under the constant changes?
So I think a lot of this is we dig into their history largely through reference checks. And so, for example, tell me about a time when they stumbled. And how do they respond? And how do they react? And a question that we'll often ask the founder is, what did the product look like 12 months ago? What's changed and why? And, a bad answer is, well, I wanted to change this one feature. A really good answer is customers gave me feedback and we responded to it. And we're looking for this balance of willing to change, but also has a point of view. Because you can't add every feature that customers ask you to add, because all you'll ever be doing is, manipulating the product. But you also can't be so fixed in what you think your product and vision is. And those are the founders that we invest in.
Are there any systems in place that you think they should have at the beginning of their small business journey that sets them up for being able to adapt in the future?
So a framework that I use with founders of all types, whether they're seeking funding or not, is I start by doing a brain dump. What are all the questions you have? And it can be, what should the pricing be? Who should my customer be? How am I going to get them? Who should my co-founder be? And I'll spend like 30 minutes just literally like asking them questions. And they'll end up having like 50 Post-it notes in front of them where they will have all these different questions. And it actually feels good to get all of that out of your brain. And then I say, I'm going to ask you to plot those, and I like Post-it notes because they're very movable, on a 2x2 matrix of importance and uncertainty. So importance is how important is answering this question to your startup? And then uncertainty is how uncertain is this question? And so an example of a highly uncertain, very important question might be, how am I going to acquire customers? And then what I tell founders to do is only look at the questions in the top right quadrant. Really important, really uncertain questions, and then go out and answer those questions in the laziest way possible. The mistake that I see founders make is that when you're a founder, your to-do list is 1,000,000 miles long.
Of course.
And there are 1,000 uncertainties. And what people tend to do is they answer the questions that are the easiest to answer. What should my domain name be? What should my logo look like? What color is going to be, my logo made out of? And they spend all this time, should I become an LLC or an S Corp or a C Corp? And I always get these types of like tactical questions. And so at the end of the day, they've done 8 things. They feel like they've made progress. You've made no progress. You need to make progress on the questions that are really important to the success of your business and highly uncertain. That is the framework that I tell founders to use. And when I do that and they actually follow it, like a light bulb really goes off, like, oh, I was wasting all this time working on my, Twitter handle.
Give me an example of the laziest possible way.
A really lazy experiment is what's called a landing page. It's literally just a website that says, we are building X. Here are 2 bullet points explaining it. Give us your email address. It's going to launch in 6 months, and we'll email you when it's done. It requires you to do nothing, build nothing, market nothing. You just have to send this website out to 1,000 people. The laziest experiment is just to have 2 versions of the website. Version 1 is socks that are blue and waterproof. And then the other versions are going to be red, and they're going to be made of cashmere, and they're going to be really warm, and they're going to be really fuzzy, right? And then you send both of those websites out to 1,000 people, and you see which one gives you more email addresses. And that is an experiment that will actually tell you something, because if they're not even willing to give you their email address, they're never going to buy your blue toe gloves. And so the idea is to run experiments that get you as close as possible to the customer that actually resolve an uncertainty for you.
Wait, I love that. That would be called A/B testing. Am I wrong?
A/B testing, but with a landing page.
Right. Yeah. Let's think about the founder that doesn't come in with that level of confidence and how that impacts your vision as an investor of what this could be. How do you help someone build that confidence to be able to negotiate with investors?
When I get a founder who is lower on that confidence spectrum, there are a few things that we do. The first thing is we do give them that feedback, and we say that it shouldn't matter. But you have to pitch investors, customers, new employees. So let's at least work on it. And actually, we paired them with pitch coaches and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
That's one thing. The second thing we'll say is we're not asking you to become this completely different person, but just the most articulate, confident version of you. And then I teach a course called The Leader's Voice at Columbia, and we talk about the 3 Vs: verbal, vocal, and visual.
Okay.
Verbal are the words that you use. Vocal is how you sound, and then visual is how you look, your gestures, how much space you're taking up. And those are the dimensions we have them work on. And people can actually very quickly dial up their confidence and executive presence with very small tweaks.
When it comes to building a business that attracts investment, what is one thing you wish founders would do right before they walk into the boardroom?
Know your investor. Do a little bit of research. I think, as with anything in life, knowing your audience is really important. And I find that people will come in and they'll pitch me, and I'm like, you didn't spend 20 seconds to look up who it is that you're speaking to. They might be pitching an education product, not know that I'm a professor, or they're pitching a company that we are invested in a direct competitor of, and our portfolio is publicly listed. So just a couple minutes of research. This is true for an interview, a job interview. Yeah. This is true for a date, if you can, right? Like whatever the case is, do a little bit of research, know your audience.
I see that time and again. Every time I get asked for advice on podcasting or anything like that, know your audience is one of my first things that I say. Do not copy paste. Know who you're talking to all the time, who is receiving this information. That's how you decide a lot of things.
For sure.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about is loneliness. When we first started This Is Small Business, a lot of the anecdotes I would get from aspiring business owners or people who were just starting was, I don't know who to talk to. I don't know who to go. I feel very alone. Any tools you can share that could help prevent that feeling of loneliness?
The feeling of constantly not knowing is very overwhelming, and to not be alone in that feeling, I think, is really helpful. And one of the great things about the world being so online is there is a meetup or a community or a subreddit for everyone, right? If you are more of an introvert, like maybe a subreddit is helpful because then you can be anonymous, it's private. And I also think it's really important to talk to people who are both ahead of you on the journey and also behind you on the journey. Ahead of you is helpful because if someone has been running a company for 2 years longer, they can teach you things and help you see around corners. But I think it's also really important to talk to people who are a year or two behind you on the entrepreneurial journey, because mentorship feels really good. And it also makes you realize, oh, I've learned a lot and look at all the stuff that I've figured out over the last year. And frankly, you need to help the next generation of entrepreneurs. And so it's this really nice virtuous cycle.
Angela, thank you so much for everything that we've learned today. I love that you had a framework, mental model for almost all of the questions I asked.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for this episode of This Is Small Business, brought to you by Amazon. If you're into stories about everything entrepreneurship throws your way, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next episode. I'd also love to hear from you, so drop a comment and tell us what part of this conversation inspired you the most. Until next time, hasta luego, and thanks for watching.